One of the hallmarks of the good girl, nice guy conditioning is your relationship to conflict. This is something that I've worked with both men and women on in different stages of life, different income levels, and it seems to be that there are some themes that tend to play out that we need to look at. And that's what I want to talk about today is what actually starts to shift both internally and in your relationships when you stop trying to prevent conflict, and the corrective lens through which you need to look at conflict so that you can show up in a way that feels really empowering for you and creates a corrective experience in your relationships. If you're new to my work, my name's Courtney Shand. I love helping men with depth learn how to lead from there. And if you are wanting to step into any type of leadership in your life, whether it's stepping more into your purpose at work or in relationships, you are going to run into some situations that you might be calling conflict. And that's why I want to give you a new lens to look through so that you can start stepping through those situations and start feeling a shift in how you're showing up. Because this is something that I've definitely struggled with. I used to resist conflict because of the story that I made it mean about me, the type of person that I was or didn't want to be. Because I, like most people, want to be someone who is compassionate and level-headed and able to see multiple sides of an argument or be a team player or a good friend. And it's actually those stories that are causing you to show up to conflict the way that you are. And as a result, I'm going to just put this out here that you're probably playing small. Because what happens when we see conflict through that lens is that we immediately remove ourselves from that we space, the relational field that we actually need to be stepping into in order to co-create a healthy relationship dynamic where we're getting our needs met, where it feels fun and enjoyable to connect with other people, where we get to feel seen and met in ways that are really meaningful for us. And in return, the same is true for them, where we're clear on what's important to them, what needs they're getting met from this dynamic, and in a way that we can collaborate on what we're building together that feels really good and authentic for both people. But where most people get stuck is in that process of stepping back into that relational space, because it actually requires you to confront internally all of those feelings that you have been resisting externally when they've come up in relationships. So that feeling of tension that starts to rise from your belly to your chest when someone's bringing information to you about something that you did that made them uncomfortable, or something that they would like to experience with you, or simply something that you don't necessarily see eye to eye on. The challenge with most people who have that good girl, nice guy conditioning is that you can't really distinguish the difference between information that would actually allow both of you to experience more harmony and carrying the weight of the entire relationship on your shoulders. And something that I've observed both in my own experience and in helping people through this process is that we can say that we want healthy relationships and that we're willing to show up and do our part of it, but that there's actually some fear of getting that level of intimacy that we say that we need or crave, because it requires us to be with the feelings that we have been taught to resist. So there's three things that start to show up when you stop trying to prevent conflict and start seeing it as confrontation, either with something within yourself or something that you're both confronting together. This was a huge shift for me just in how I speak about conflict. So I hope that this will be helpful for you too, because a lot of the clients that I work with are actually capable of a lot of intimacy. They can see people really clearly, they can sense what's going on, and they can hold a level of intensity in their nervous system that sets them up for a healthy amount of intimacy. What they actually have a hard time with is being on the receiving end of the reciprocal of that, which is going to show up as you not asking for what you need, allowing people to show up for you in the same way, and learning how to relax that feeling in your body that starts to show up when you are getting what it is that you're wanting. And this is why so much of the work that I do includes a nervous system component, because it's one thing to shift things mentally, and it's another thing to be with the sensations that we weren't ever taught how to be with to begin with. The second thing that shows up when you stop trying to prevent conflict and start seeing it as contrast or confrontation, and I know that those are just minor shifts in your language, but they actually do shift how you start to feel viscerally as you're stepping into that space. So the second thing that shows up is that you get to start confronting the stories that are occurring within yourself. And this was actually the hardest part for me, because it was almost like there were two parts of me. One that was scared and unsure of how things were going to play out, and the other that was certain of how things would play out. The problem was the one who was certain of how things were going to play out was convinced that it was going to blow up in my face, that it was going to be really horrible and terrifying, and that I wouldn't be able to handle it. And so, of course, my mind latched onto that as a rational way of thinking. And it wasn't until I started to see these moments as initiations for this part of myself that had been more quiet and reserved that I started to see these two characters start to balance each other out, where the level of sensitivity to what was actually happening and what I was wanting was being balanced out by the confidence and certainty of this other aspect of my mind. And this is what has actually helped with clients in reframing this initiation within themselves so that they can start to confront why it's so scary for them. What is it that they actually think is going to happen? And what does that feel like viscerally for them if that outcome were to play out? Why do they think they can't handle it? And what do they believe it means about them? Because all of these stories have just been compartmentalized on your mind, almost like a record player, just continuing to play the same song over and over again. When what we're needing to do is not just put on a new record, that would be nice, but actually just expand the lens through which we're looking so that we can start to not only challenge that story, but also add context to the narrative. I find that a lot of trauma work is around seeing the context of what is actually happening, what was actually happening, and the experience that we had within that context. Because especially if you have been conditioned to remove yourself from that relational field, that's going to have a pattern of you showing up bracing in a particular way. And they end up being a lot of work for not a lot of ROI. But what starts to shift when you see this as an initiation within yourself is you start taking on the lens of, I'm going to be learning this skill either way. Regardless of how this specific scenario plays out, this is a skill that I want to have on board, and it's worth practicing in small ways so that I can start to build that muscle and build some finesse and confidence with using it. Which leads me to my third point of what starts to change when you stop trying to prevent conflict and start seeing it as contrast or confrontation. A lot of people who find my work are like, I wish I could just trust myself more. That's a really common phrase that they use. And I would say that the reason that you don't trust yourself is because when push comes to shove, you shove yourself out of the relational space over and over again, which is why contrast feels like more of a threat in your nervous system than just getting along with everything and being harmonious with everyone. And that's what has you staying in situations that are uncomfortable for you, where you're having to learn how to tolerate the wrong type of discomfort and always feeling a little bit like you don't belong. Like you're disconnected, not only from yourself, but from everyone else. Because the reality is, as scary and daunting as confrontation may seem, whether it feels like disharmony or a lack of connection, that's already your current reality. And that's where the micro-initiation mindset is most helpful, because you already know what is available using the tools and skills that you're currently using. So worst case scenario, you can always come back to that. But if you want to start to trust yourself more, it's going to require you to have a different relationship with discomfort. And the best way that I have found to do this is to solidify within yourself what it is that you're actually wanting. Because in that process, you're going to be confronted with all the stories and reasons why that may not be possible for you that have just been swirling around in your mind that need to be accounted for so that you can actually move towards the thing that you say that it is that you want. This happened to me just the other day. I was having to share with my partner something that I was seeing that was feeling like a concern that we hadn't been addressing. And in the past, I would have probably tried to think my way through other scenarios, other routes I could take to get the same goal, really trying to discern if this is something I should be concerned about or if I'm being irrational. And so by the time I showed up to have a conversation with someone, my body was registering all of that information and viscerally putting that out. So instead of having a clear thing to focus on, what I was actually bringing into the relational space, if I stepped into it, was a lot of chaos and noise. But because I can now see it as a need that I'm having in this dynamic that we're creating together that's not being accounted for, I was able to get really clear on what that need was, where the concern was, and point both of our attention in that direction. Because what I've actually found is that when I'm not bracing for the inevitable fallout, that is usually not what ends up happening. I learned something from Alison Armstrong a couple years ago where she said the argument isn't over until you're both glad that it happened. And I use that as kind of a North Star for conflict now. And I find that to be so helpful because if we're not both glad that we have had the conversation, where we have come back into connection with each other, where I feel seen and you feel seen, and we're able to come to a state of greater harmony and intimacy, then it just means that the conversation isn't finished, which was a huge relief for me as someone who thought that I would have one chance to present my entire argument for why I needed this need met, which, as you can imagine, would be difficult to be across from. But the more that I've learned to start from the inside and really work on that initiation that I need to have internally so that I can come from a place of congruence with what I'm thinking and saying I want and what I'm viscerally bringing into the space, the truth is you don't have to be a jerk when you deliver the information. It really can be a calm conversation where you can just bring up one thing to focus on together in a way that invites the other person into the conversation, into the relational space with you, because you're framing it as a need that you're needing to get met instead of something that they're doing that assumes that they are the villain in the scenario. And I realize that conflicts happen on a spectrum. There are things that are just minor preferences that we need to discuss all the way to deal breakers. But the more that I've gotten clear on, from a visceral perspective, what it is that I am needing to own more within myself in order to stay engaged in the relationship, the more intimacy and affection become available, the more I'm able to connect with myself in a way that confronts some of those long-standing stories that have kept me playing small, and the more I ultimately start to trust both myself and the person that I'm trying to connect with. Because what I've actually learned in the process of not trying to prevent conflict, but rather to see it as either something I need to confront within myself to come to the relational space in a more empowered way, or something we need to confront for both of us to stay happy in this relationship, is that the other person likely already sees you with more respect and esteem, and they're actually waiting for you to show up in that same level of respect and esteem. And the only way to bring that to the relational container is to have it come from within yourself. And that's where getting really clear on those stories that you need to confront within yourself so that you can come into a state of congruence where what you're saying you're wanting and what you're viscerally acting like are one and the same. That's when conflict shifts out of something that feels like an instinctual threat and into something that just feels alive. And when you can start bringing more of that aliveness within yourself, that's when life starts to get really fun and relationships start to light up. I did a video of the mindset shift that allows you to start seeing life through the lens of exhilaration, and I'll link it here. And if this has been resonating and you want to take it deeper, there are 2 resources that I have that would be helpful for you. One is called Leave Room for Magic. It's a mini course that I did. I think it's less than an hour training of how to approach conflict in a more empowering way. There's step-by-step processes viscerally that we walk through together so that you can have the experience in your own body. I've gotten really great feedback from that alone has shifted how people show up to dates and where they started to see how people wanted to connect with them in a different way as a result. So I love that one. I don't talk about it very often, but I will link it here and in the description below. And the second one is Grounded. Grounded is really designed to be a deeper, more embodied experience, learning how to be with those sensations in your body so that you can start to reconnect to that visceral experience that other people are having of you. I find that by like week 3 in Grounded, the men are starting to report back that people are showing up more friendly for them, or that work meetings are going more smoothly because there's not this bracing that no one had necessarily been intending, but also no one's been accounting for. Once we bring it into your conscious awareness, that starts to line up and the world around you starts to respond differently to you. And that becomes the feedback loop that you find yourself in. So that's a really fun one as well. We're going to be starting another group soon. So I'm going to put all the information that you need in the description below if that's something that you want. And as always, I have space for one-on-one support if you really want to get in and fine-tune the way that you perceive and learn how to hold more of that tension in your body. a lot of times it really does require that co-regulating effect where someone is stepping into the relational space with you and helping you process those feelings that you can't quite reach when you're trying to manage it on your own. So I would love to have you in that space as well. If you want to set up a discovery call, we can figure out what's the best route for you. And I'm going to put all the information that you need in the comment section of this video. As always, I hope this was helpful. And if you liked this, I think you're also going to like this video where I talk about the mindset shift that helps you live life with a little more exhilaration.